The screech of chair legs against marble echoed through the Morrison University Library as two security guards dragged Marcus Chen away from his study table. His white cane clattered to the floor, spinning twice before coming to rest against a row of ancient philosophy texts. The 22-year-old graduate student's fingers groped desperately for the Braille notebook he'd been working on, but it was already beyond his reach. "This is completely wrong," Sarah Martinez shouted from across the reading room, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. She jumped up from her own table, sending her laptop sliding dangerously close to the edge. "He's a graduate student here. You can't just—" The older security guard, his badge reading Thompson, tightened his grip on Marcus's arm. "Ma'am, please step back. We're following protocol based on a legitimate complaint." Marcus's head turned toward the familiar voice, his dark eyes unfocused but filled with confusion and growing panic. "Sarah, what's happening? I was just studying for my comprehensive exams. I have permission to be here until midnight." From behind the circulation desk, a middle-aged woman with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a burgundy blazer watched the scene with satisfied determination. Karen Whitmore had been observing this particular student for weeks, and today she had finally gathered enough evidence to act. Her manicured fingers drummed against the desk surface as she spoke to the head librarian. "You see, Margaret, I told you there was something suspicious about that boy. Real blind people don't move around that confidently. They don't navigate between tables without bumping into things. And did you notice how he was reading from that laptop screen earlier? I saw him with my own eyes." Margaret Sterling, the head librarian for over 2 decades, rubbed her temples as she watched the chaos unfold. She had known Marcus for 3 years, had personally helped him set up his assistive technology workstation, had watched him struggle through late nights preparing for his master's thesis defense. But Karen Whitmore was on the board of trustees, and her influence reached far beyond the library walls. "Mrs. Whitmore, I really think there's been a misunderstanding. Marcus is one of our most dedicated students. He's been using our adaptive technology services since—" "Don't you misunderstanding me. Margaret, I've done my research. Real disabilities are obvious. This boy is clearly taking advantage of the system, probably getting extra time on exams, special parking privileges, maybe even financial aid he doesn't deserve. It's fraud, plain and simple." The second security guard, younger and clearly uncomfortable with the situation, loosened his grip slightly. "Sir, if you could just cooperate and come with us quietly, we can sort this out at the security office." Marcus's breathing became rapid and shallow. The familiar walls of the library, which had been his sanctuary for countless hours of study, suddenly felt foreign and hostile. "I don't understand. I'm registered with Disability Services. My advisor, Dr. Rodriguez. She knows I'm here. I have documentation." "Documentation can be forged," Karen interrupted, her voice carrying across the now silent reading room. Every student had stopped their work to witness the spectacle. Some were recording with their phones. Others were whispering among themselves. But all were frozen in disbelief. Marcus's face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. He had been legally blind since birth due to Leber congenital amaurosis, a rare genetic condition that had shaped every aspect of his life. The years of learning to navigate the world, the countless hours mastering assistive technology, the determination that had brought him to graduate school, all of it was being dismissed by a woman who had never spoken to him before today. "My documentation is not forged," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I've been blind my entire life. I use a screen reader called JAWS to access my computer. The laptop you think you saw me reading from was actually reading to me through my headphones. If you would just let me explain—" Enough of this charade, Karen snapped, stepping out from behind the desk. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as she approached the group. Officer, I want him removed from campus immediately. This is clearly a case of disability fraud, and I won't have it in our institution. Thompson spoke into his radio, his voice low but audible to those nearby. We need a patrol unit at Morrison Library. Possible fraud case. Need to escort individual off-campus property. Sarah pushed through the gathering crowd of students, her face flushed with anger. This is insane, Marcus. Tell them about your guide dog training, about the mobility classes you took freshman year. Marcus's voice cracked slightly as he responded, I don't have a guide dog. I've always used a cane. I'm very familiar with this campus layout, which is why I move confidently. It took me 2 years to memorize every pathway, every obstacle, every shortcut. That's not fraud, that's adaptation. Karen's laugh was cold and dismissive. Oh, how convenient. All these explanations. Next you'll tell me that blind people can use computers and read books too. Do you think we're stupid? The irony of her statement hung in the air like a heavy curtain. Several students exchanged incredulous glances, but the security guards continued their job with mechanical precision. They had their orders, and questioning the Board of Trustees member wasn't part of their job description. Dr. Elena Rodriguez burst through the library doors just as the campus police officers arrived. She had received a frantic text from one of Marcus's classmates and had run across campus from her office in the psychology building. Her dark hair was disheveled, and she was slightly out of breath as she approached the group. What is the meaning of this? She demanded, her accented English carrying the authority of someone who had been fighting for students' rights for over 15 years. Officer, this is one of my graduate students. There must be some mistake. The lead police officer, a tall man with graying temples, consulted his notes. Ma'am, we've received a complaint about fraudulent disability claims. We need to remove this individual from campus pending investigation. Dr. Rodriguez's eyes blazed with fury as she looked from the officers to Karen, then back to Marcus, who was now visibly shaking. Fraudulent disability claims. Are you out of your minds? Marcus has been in my program for 3 years. I've watched him overcome obstacles that would break most people. He's published 2 papers in peer-reviewed journals and is on track to defend his thesis next month. Dr. Rodriguez, Marcus said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. They think I'm faking being blind. The professor's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then a rage so pure it seemed to radiate heat. You think he's faking blindness? Have you lost your collective minds? Karen stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. I've been observing suspicious behavior for weeks. This young man moves too confidently, uses technology too easily, and navigates spaces without the typical struggles of a truly disabled person. I've done my research on what blind people can and cannot do. Your research, Dr. Rodriguez's voice rose to a level that made several students step back. Your research, I have a PhD in psychology, with a specialization in disability studies. I've worked with visually impaired individuals for 2 decades. And you, a woman with what? A business degree, think you can diagnose visual impairment from across a room. The police officer looked increasingly uncomfortable as the situation escalated. Ladies, please. We have our orders. The complaint has been filed. And we need to follow protocol. Marcus suddenly spoke up, his voice stronger now despite the humiliation burning in his chest. What protocol requires you to remove a registered student from campus without due process? What protocol allows someone to make a diagnosis of disability fraud without any medical training or legal authority. The question hung in the air, and for the first time, uncertainty flickered across the officer's face. But Karen was ready with her answer. The protocol that protects honest students from fraudsters who abuse accommodations, meant for truly disabled people. Resources are limited. Officer, every fake disability claim takes opportunities away from someone who genuinely needs help. Sarah couldn't contain herself any longer. She stepped directly in front of Karen, her young face twisted with indignation. You want to know what Marcus's accommodations are? Extended time on exams, because it takes longer to read through a screen reader. A distraction-free testing environment, because he needs to hear the text being read aloud. Access to assistive technology that costs thousands of dollars. You think he chose this? You think anyone would voluntarily navigate the world without sight? Karen's response was swift and cutting. I think there are people in this world who will do anything for an advantage. Academic accommodations, preferred parking, sympathy from professors, financial aid. The benefits of a disability claim are substantial. The crowd of students had grown larger, and phones were definitely recording now. Marcus could hear the whispers, the shifting feet, the occasional gasp of disbelief. This was his worst nightmare, being the center of attention, being doubted, being forced to prove his disability to strangers. Dr. Rodriguez pulled out her own phone and dialed rapidly. Dr. Patterson, it's Elena Rodriguez. I need you at the Morrison Library immediately. Bring Marcus Chen's medical file, the complete file. Yes, it's an emergency. Karen's eyes narrowed. Medical files can be falsified. Doctors can be paid off. I'm not impressed by paperwork. The callousness of her statement sent a wave of shocked murmurs through the gathered students. Even the security guards exchanged glances that suggested they were beginning to question the wisdom of their actions. Marcus straightened his shoulders and faced the direction of Karen's voice. When he spoke, his words were measured and clear, cutting through the chaos like a blade. Mrs. Whitmore, I presume I've heard your voice at board meetings before. You want proof of my blindness? Fine. You're standing approximately 8 feet away from me, slightly to my left, wearing what sounds like low heels, based on the click pattern when you walk. There's a coffee stain on the front of your blazer. I can smell it from here. You're nervous, which is why your voice is pitched higher than usual, and you're trying to maintain authority by speaking more loudly than necessary. Karen's hand instinctively moved to the coffee stain on her blazer, her face flushing. Lucky guesses. You could have been briefed. There are 47 students in this room right now, Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength. Sarah is standing to my right, approximately 4 feet away. She's wearing her favorite jasmine perfume, and her stress-anxiety breathing pattern indicates she's been crying. The student behind me, probably Jake from my research methods class, is recording this conversation on his iPhone. I know because iPhones make a specific electronic hum when recording video, different from Samsung devices. He paused, turning his head slightly toward the circulation desk. Margaret, your computer terminal is still logged into the library system. I can hear the specific sound signature of the database software running. You have 3 holds requests pending, 2 overdue notices queued to print, and someone just placed a digital reserve on the Davis textbook for social psychology. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret stared at her computer screen, confirming every detail Marcus had mentioned. The students looked at each other with a mixture of awe and growing anger at what they were witnessing. Dr. Rodriguez's voice was deadly quiet when she spoke. Marcus has developed what we call enhanced auditory processing as an adaptation to his blindness. He can identify individuals by their breathing patterns, recognize electronic devices by their sound signatures, and navigate complex social situations through audio cues that sighted people never notice. This is not superhuman, this is survival. But Karen was not deterred. If anything, Marcus's demonstration seemed to fuel her suspicions further. Exactly my point. Real blind people can't do things like that. They stumble around. They need constant help. They can't live independently. This boy is clearly faking his disability to gain advantages. The ignorance in her statement hit the crowd like a physical blow. Several students actually gasped audibly, and one young woman near the back started crying. Dr. Patterson arrived at that moment, slightly out of breath and carrying a thick medical folder. Dr. James Patterson was the head of Student Disability Services and had worked with Marcus since his freshman year. He took in the scene the police officers, the security guards, Marcus standing surrounded by people, Karen Whitmore's defiant stance, and his face went pale. "What in God's name is happening here?" he demanded. The police officer stepped forward. "Dr. Patterson, we have a complaint of disability fraud. We need to escort this student off campus pending investigation." Dr. Patterson's response was immediate and explosive. "Disability fraud. Are you insane? Marcus Chen has Leber congenital amaurosis, a genetic condition that causes blindness from birth. I have 22 years of medical documentation, genetic testing results, ophthalmologist reports, and neurological assessments. This is one of the most well-documented cases of visual impairment I've ever managed." He held up the thick folder like a weapon. "Do you want to see his genetic test results showing the CEP290 mutation, his electroretinogram showing no electrical activity in his retinas, his visual field test showing complete blindness, his mobility training certificates, his Braille literacy assessments?" Karen crossed her arms, unmoved. "Paperwork can be fabricated. Medical fraud happens all the time. I'm calling for an independent assessment by a neutral party." An independent assessment. Dr. Patterson's voice rose several octaves. "By whom? You, a woman with no medical training, no expertise in disability assessment, no understanding of visual impairment. You want to override 22 years of medical documentation because you've decided, based on your vast experience of watching someone walk across a library, that you know better than geneticists, ophthalmologists, neurologists, and disability specialists." The police officer was now clearly struggling with the situation. The documentation seemed overwhelming, but he had his orders, and Karen Whitmore's position on the Board of Trustees carried significant weight. "Ma'am, I understand your concerns," he said to Dr. Patterson, "but we have a formal complaint that needs to be investigated through proper channels. The student needs to be removed from campus until this is resolved." Marcus felt the world spinning around him. 3 years of hard work, of proving himself, of fighting for his place in the academic world, and it could all be destroyed by one woman's ignorance and prejudice. "How long?" he asked quietly. "What?" the officer responded. "How long will I be banned from campus? I have comprehensive exams next week. My thesis defense is scheduled for next month. I'm a teaching assistant for 3 undergraduate courses. How long will this investigation take?" The officer consulted his notes. "Pending a full investigation, which could take several weeks, possibly months, depending on the complexity of the case." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. Months. His entire academic career, his future, his dreams all suspended because one woman refused to believe that blind people could be competent and independent. Sarah stepped forward again, her voice shaking with emotion. "This is discrimination. Pure and simple disability discrimination. You're punishing him for being too successful, for not fitting your narrow stereotype of what blindness should look like. Karen's response was sharp and immediate. I'm protecting this institution from fraud. If he's truly disabled, then a thorough investigation will prove it. If he's not, then justice will be served. Either way, I'm doing my job as a board member to ensure integrity in our academic programs. Dr. Rodriguez pulled out her phone again. I'm calling the dean of students, the provost, and the university president. This is going to stop right now. Call whoever you want, Karen replied coolly. I have the full support of the Board of Trustees. We've discussed concerns about accommodation abuse in several meetings. This investigation has been approved at the highest levels. The revelation that this wasn't an impulsive decision, that it had been planned and approved, sent a chill through everyone present. Marcus felt his knees go weak as the full scope of what he was facing became clear. The police officer made his decision. Sir, I need you to come with us now. You can gather your belongings under supervision, but you need to leave campus immediately. Marcus bent down slowly, his hands searching for his white cane. When his fingers found it, he gripped it tightly, using it to steady himself as he stood. The simple act of retrieving his mobility aid seemed to underscore the absurdity of the situation. But Karen remained unmoved. Sarah, Marcus said quietly, can you get my notebook and laptop? I'll need them for... He paused, realizing he didn't know what he would need them for if he couldn't return to campus. As Sarah gathered his belongings, Marcus turned toward where he knew Karen was standing. Mrs. Whitmore, may I ask you something? What? She replied tersely. What would convince you that my blindness is real? What would it take for you to believe that a blind person can be educated, successful, and independent? Karen's answer came without hesitation. Real blind people need help with everything. They can't live alone, can't work, can't navigate independently. They certainly can't succeed in graduate school without massive amounts of assistance. If you were really blind, you'd be in a special program somewhere, not competing with normal students for academic achievements. The ignorance and prejudice in her words struck everyone present like a physical blow. Even the police officers looked uncomfortable with her statement. Marcus nodded slowly, a sad smile crossing his face. I see. So, in your world, Mrs. Whitmore, being disabled means being less than human. It means accepting limitations that others place on you, rather than pushing beyond them. It means being grateful for whatever scraps of opportunity society throws your way, instead of demanding equal access to education and career opportunities. He straightened his shoulders and extended his cane. Officers, I'm ready to go. But I want everyone here to understand what's really happening. This isn't about fraud, or accommodations, or resources. This is about a woman who is so threatened by the idea that a disabled person can be successful that she would rather destroy someone's life than admit she was wrong about what disability looks like. As the police officers escorted Marcus toward the library exit, the crowd of students began to murmur and shift. Phones were recording, text messages were flying, and social media posts were already starting to appear. The story of what happened in Morrison Library was spreading far beyond the campus walls. Dr. Rodriguez and Dr. Patterson followed the group outside, both already making phone calls to university administrators. Sarah walked beside Marcus, carrying his belongings and whispering reassurances that she would make sure his professors knew what happened. Karen Whitmore remained in the library, feeling victorious and righteous in her actions. She had no idea that by the end of the week, her name would be known across the country as a symbol of everything wrong with society's treatment of disabled individuals. The investigation that Karen had demanded would indeed take place, but it wouldn't unfold the way she expected. Instead of proving Marcus was a fraud, it would expose a web of prejudice and discrimination that reached far beyond one woman's ignorance. Medical experts, disability rights advocates, and legal scholars would examine not just Marcus's documentation, but the entire process that had allowed his removal from campus. Dr. Sarah Chen, a renowned ophthalmologist and researcher at the university's medical school, arrived at the library 30 minutes after Marcus had been escorted away. She was not related to Marcus, but the similarity in surnames would later become a point of conspiracy theories among those who supported Karen's actions. "Where is he?" she demanded as she entered the building, her white coat still bearing the evidence of a rushed trip from her research lab. Margaret Sterling looked up from the circulation desk where she had been fielding phone calls from concerned faculty members. "Dr. Chen, Marcus was removed from campus. Mrs. Whitmore insisted that—" "Karen Whitmore ordered the removal of one of my research subjects. Dr. Chen's voice carried a dangerous edge. "A student whose genetic condition I've been studying for 3 years, as part of my NIH-funded research into Leber congenital amaurosis." Karen, who had been standing nearby speaking with security staff, turned at the mention of her name. "Your research subject. How convenient. Another piece of the conspiracy." Dr. Chen approached Karen with the measured pace of a predator. "Mrs. Whitmore, I presume I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, Chief of Ophthalmology at University Medical Center. Marcus Chen has been part of my longitudinal study on genetic causes of congenital blindness for 3 years. I have electroretinograms, optical coherence, tomography scans, genetic sequencing results, and visual field tests dating back to his infancy. Are you suggesting that his parents somehow falsified medical records from birth, predicting that their son would one day attend this university and attempt to defraud the disability services system?" Karen's confidence wavered slightly, but she held her ground. "Coincidences happen. Research can be biased. I'm not backing down from my assessment." "Your assessment, Doctor." Chen's laugh was cold and bitter. "Your assessment based on what qualifications? What medical training? What expertise in visual impairment assessment?" The questions hung in the air as more faculty members began arriving at the library. Word was spreading quickly through the academic community, and the response was swift and unified. Professor after professor, who had worked with Marcus, who had witnessed his struggles and achievements, began gathering to demand answers. Dr. Michael Torres from the Computer Science Department arrived with printouts of Marcus's code submissions and project work. This young man has contributed to 3 published papers on accessible user interface design. His work on screen reader optimization has been cited in dozens of academic articles. Are you suggesting he's been maintaining an elaborate fraud for years, while simultaneously making genuine contributions to his field? Karen's response was becoming increasingly defensive. Smart fraudsters are very convincing. They build entire false narratives around their deception. Professor Lisa Wang from the English department stepped forward holding a stack of papers. "These are Marcus's research papers, written in both print and Braille. Would you like to explain how someone faking blindness would become fluent in Braille, and not just basic Braille, but the complex mathematical and scientific notation systems used in advanced academic work?" The evidence was mounting, but Karen remained unmoved. In her mind, every piece of documentation, every expert testimony, every demonstration of Marcus's abilities only proved how elaborate and sophisticated his deception must be. By evening, the story had reached local news outlets. The image of a blind graduate student being dragged from his library study table had resonated with viewers far beyond the university community. Disability rights organizations began mobilizing. Legal experts started offering pro bono assistance, and alumni began expressing their outrage on social media. Marcus spent that first night at Sarah's apartment, staring sightlessly at the ceiling and wondering if his academic career was over. The comprehensive exams he had spent months preparing for were scheduled to begin in 6 days. His thesis defense, representing 3 years of research into inclusive design principles, was set for the following month. Everything he had worked for was now in jeopardy because one woman had decided his success was impossible. The worst part, he told Sarah as they sat in her living room, isn't even being called a fraud. It's the assumption that being blind means being less capable, less intelligent, less worthy of academic achievement. She can't imagine that someone with a disability might actually be good at something. Sarah sat beside him on the couch, holding his laptop as they read through the flood of supportive messages that had been arriving throughout the evening. Marcus, you need to see what's happening online. The hashtag #GeoJusticeForMarcus is trending. There are thousands of people sharing their own stories of disability discrimination. This is bigger than just you now. Meanwhile, across town, Karen Whitmore was discovering that her victory was not being celebrated as she had expected. Her phone had been ringing constantly with calls from reporters, angry alumni, and university administrators demanding explanations. The Board of Trustees' emergency meeting that had been called for the following morning was not going to be the congratulatory session she had anticipated. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Dr. Rachel Martinez, a nationally recognized expert in disability law and civil rights, arrived on campus accompanied by 2 attorneys from the Civil Rights Legal Defense Fund. They had driven through the night from the state capitol after seeing the news coverage. This is not just about one student, Dr. Martinez announced at an impromptu press conference on the library steps. This is about the fundamental right of disabled individuals to equal access to education. What happened to Marcus Chen yesterday represents a pattern of discrimination that we have seen in institutions across the country. The press conference drew a crowd of several hundred students and faculty members, all carrying signs demanding Marcus's reinstatement. Local news crews were joined by regional and national media outlets as the story gained traction beyond the university community. Inside the administration building, University President Dr. Amanda Foster was facing the crisis of her career. The Board of Trustees meeting had devolved into a heated argument between Karen Whitmore and the other board members, who were beginning to understand the legal and public relations nightmare they were facing. Karen, you've potentially exposed this university to millions of dollars in civil rights violations, Board Chairman Robert Hayes said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. We could lose federal funding, face Department of Education investigations, and deal with lawsuits that could bankrupt the institution. Karen remained defiant. I stand by my decision. Better to investigate one questionable case than to ignore systematic fraud in our disability services program. Systematic fraud. Dr. Foster's voice rose. Karen, I've reviewed every case in our disability services database going back 5 years. There is no evidence of systematic fraud. There is no pattern of abuse. You have created a crisis based on your personal prejudices against disabled students. The meeting was interrupted by Dr. Patterson, who entered with a stack of documentation that had been compiled overnight. I have testimonials from 12 professors who have worked with Marcus Chen. I have medical documentation from 4 different specialists. I have academic performance records showing consistent excellence over 3 years. I have letters of support from 37 classmates and colleagues. And I have a legal opinion from our university council stating that we have violated multiple federal laws by removing this student from campus without due process. The weight of evidence was overwhelming, but Karen had dug in too deeply to retreat. I don't care how much documentation you have. I don't care how many people support him. I saw what I saw, and I know what I know. Her words hung in the air like a confession of willful ignorance. The other board members exchanged glances that spoke volumes about Karen's future with the organization. Outside, the demonstration was growing larger as word spread through social media. Students from other universities began arriving to show solidarity. Disability rights activists were driving in from surrounding states. National organizations were dispatching representatives to what was becoming a landmark case in disability discrimination. Dr. Emily Stevenson, a blind professor of law at a neighboring university, addressed the crowd with a speech that would later be quoted in congressional hearings on disability rights. "What happened to Marcus Chen is not unusual," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the crowd. "Disabled people face discrimination every day from people who think they know what disability looks like, who think they can judge our capabilities based on their stereotypes and prejudices. But what is unusual is that this discrimination happened so publicly, so blatantly, with so many witnesses. This gives us an opportunity to shine a light on the prejudice that disabled people face every single day." The crowd erupted in applause, and the energy of the demonstration began to shift from angry protest to organized advocacy. This was no longer just about one student's treatment. It was becoming a movement. Back in the administration building, the emergency board meeting was reaching its conclusion. A vote of no confidence in Karen Whitmore had passed by a margin of 11-1, with only Karen voting in her own support. Her resignation from the Board of Trustees was being demanded, and her actions were being referred to the university's legal department for potential criminal charges. Dr. Foster made the decision to immediately reinstate Marcus and issue a public apology. But the damage had been done, and the legal implications were just beginning to unfold. As news of Marcus's reinstatement spread through the crowd, the cheers were mixed with demands for accountability. The protesters were not satisfied with simply undoing the injustice. They wanted to ensure it could never happen again. Marcus arrived at the campus later that afternoon, accompanied by his legal team and a crowd of supporters. As he walked across the quad toward the library, using his white cane to navigate the familiar pathways, students lined his route in silent solidarity. The power of the moment was not lost on anyone present, a blind student walking confidently through a space where his right to exist had been challenged, surrounded by people who had learned to see disability differently. The investigation that Karen had demanded did indeed take place, but not in the way she had intended. Instead of investigating Marcus's disability, authorities launched a comprehensive review of the university's handling of disability accommodations and the Board of Trustees' oversight responsibilities. The investigation revealed patterns of discrimination and prejudice that went far beyond one woman's actions. Karen Whitmore found herself facing federal civil rights charges, a lawsuit from Marcus and his legal team, and public condemnation from disability rights organizations across the country. Her business interests began suffering as clients and partners distanced themselves from her toxic reputation. The woman who had thought she was protecting the university from fraud had instead become the face of institutional discrimination. Marcus's comprehensive exams were rescheduled, and he passed them with distinction. His thesis defense became a celebrated event, attended by faculty, students, and disability rights advocates from across the region. His research on inclusive design principles was published in a top-tier academic journal and has since been cited in hundreds of other studies. But perhaps the most significant outcome was the policy changes that emerged from the crisis. The university implemented comprehensive disability awareness training for all faculty and staff. New protocols were established to protect students from discriminatory actions. The Board of Trustees was restructured to include disability advocates and experts. And a new scholarship fund was created to support disabled students pursuing higher education. The Morrison Library, where the incident began, was renamed the Chen Martinez Accessible Learning Center in honor of Marcus and Dr. Rodriguez, who had fought so fiercely for his rights. The center became a model for inclusive design and universal access, serving as a reminder that disability is not a limitation to be pitied, but a form of human diversity to be celebrated and accommodated. 2 years later, Marcus completed his PhD and accepted a position as assistant professor of human-computer interaction at a prestigious research university. His work continues to focus on making technology more accessible to people with disabilities, and he regularly speaks at conferences about the intersection of disability, technology, and social justice. Karen Whitmore served 18 months in federal prison for civil rights violations and was ordered to pay substantial financial damages to Marcus and the university. Upon her release, she was required to complete community service with disability rights organizations, where she slowly began to understand the harm her prejudices had caused. The case became a landmark in disability rights law, cited in legal briefs and academic papers as an example of how deeply ingrained prejudices can lead to systematic discrimination. But more importantly, it became a story of how one person's courage in the face of injustice can catalyze broader social change. On quiet evenings, Marcus sometimes returns to the library where it all began. He sits at the same table where he was studying that day, working on his research and teaching materials. The space feels different now, not just because of the physical renovations that made it more accessible, but because of the shift in consciousness that occurred there. The students who witnessed that day's events carry the memory with them, and many have gone on to become advocates for disability rights in their own careers. The faculty who stood up for Marcus continue to push for inclusive practices in their departments. The administrators who learned from the crisis have implemented policies that protect vulnerable students across the system. And sometimes, late at night, when the library is nearly empty, Marcus reflects on the strange irony that Karen Whitmore's attempt to prove he was not really blind had resulted in the most visible demonstration of disability rights advocacy the campus had ever seen. Her prejudice had become the catalyst for exactly the kind of change that she had tried to prevent. The white cane that had clattered to the marble floor that day still bears a small scratch from the incident. Marcus keeps it as a reminder not of the discrimination he faced, but of the strength he found in standing up to it, and of the community that rallied around him when his rights were threatened. Today, when students ask him about that day, Marcus tells them that the real blindness was not his. It was the inability of others to see beyond their own prejudices and assumptions. True sight, he explains, comes not from the eyes, but from the willingness to recognize the full humanity and potential in every person, regardless of their abilities or disabilities. The story of what happened in Morrison Library continues to be told, shared as a lesson in courage, justice, and the power of communities to stand up against discrimination. And in lecture halls and conference rooms across the country, a new generation of students and professionals are learning that disability is not a tragedy to be pitied or a fraud to be exposed, but simply another way of experiencing and navigating the world, one that deserves the same respect, opportunities, and dignity as any other.